Nik, Allie, welcome to the Interrupted Podcast, guys. I'm thrilled that we were able to work this out and have you on. How you doing?
Doing good.
Really good. Thanks for having us, Steve.
Yeah, absolutely. And Allie, big shout out. Thank you for uh, tag teaming this. And I absolutely love that we have another couple on. We've had two other couples on the show since we started 2 years ago, and the shows are so well received because of, I think, the perspective that both people can bring to the conversation and the context that we're able to create. So have you guys been doing some podcasts together? Have you?
Yeah, this is our first one.
Awesome.
Yeah, Nick's done a few so far, but this is my first.
Awesome. Well, I'm glad it's here on the Interrupted Podcast. That's awesome. But we're going to talk about travel. We're going to talk about sabbaticals. We're going to talk about where you guys are right now, because for me, I'm about to go to bed when this is over, and you guys are just getting your day started. So there's a little teaser for everybody listening. They're just getting going, and part of the logistical issues that we were working through. But this journey that I think we're about to go on in the next hour or so is going to be very impactful, and that's my hope. Like I've told you all before, getting an email from our mutual friend, and then everything from checking out your website and our little lead up conversation, Nik. Once again, just I appreciate the courage really it takes for you all to kind of get up and share your story, and hopefully, have it fall on people that will allow it to interrupt where they're at and maybe pursue some things that you're pursuing.
Absolutely.
So, well, cool. Let's get into it. I've got to hear some context. So I'm getting the current end when I look at the website and have the lead up conversations, but let's go back and let people know a little bit about your story. And I'm excited to hear as well. And I like to reserve these conversations for when we first get to have them. But you all can choose. If you need to argue a little bit on recording, that's okay. Who's going to go first? But I'd love to hear a little bit about your family of origin. What kind of homes and what kind of places did you grow up in? Because that helps to inform where we are now, and maybe some things you had to grow through, growing pains, things like that. But just what it was like to grow up, and then we'll get into how you all met here in a little bit. But tell me a little bit about yourselves.
You want me to go?
Yeah, go for it.
So I was raised by great parents. Very blessed to have both of my parents present. And, I would describe both of my folks as very hardworking people. I got to grow up in an environment where my dad had started a business just before I was born. And for a number of years, my mom was the breadwinner of the family. She was working 3 jobs. Both of them grew up in a small town. Both of my folks come from a more blue collar background, I would say. But slowly, Dad's business became more successful, and I kind of got to be along for the ride. So from a young age, I was getting to tag along with him on business trips. I was the kid working trade shows, and I sort of grew up in that environment. So you could almost say that was my first taste of travel. Was just getting to kind of go around the United States and go to trade shows and things like that. They're in the Christian products space, and so.
Oh, really? Awesome. What kind of, if you can share, what kind of things?
Sure. Yeah. Christian themed T-shirts is the bread and butter, but all kinds of things now. They've been doing it for over 35 years.
Fantastic. Oh, that's awesome.
So, go ahead. Sorry.
No, I was going to say that. I mean, that industry of itself, I feel like from even the 90s on has just like it's boomed. So I'm sure they've got to see a lot of changes in how that industry has come about.
Yeah, it was wild, but I'll just kind of punctuate what I'm saying with this. Hardworking people. And I just got to see that all through my life. And then, of course, on the other side of having a successful business, generosity, integrity, and really just blessed because so many people out there do not have both parents present. And just great blessed upbringing. Can't complain. Yeah, that's kind of the background.
When did you have that realization? Did you know from an early age that, hey, this is something special? I mean, early age, even like in your teenage years, do you feel like you understood the amount that your parents were pouring into you, and just at your maturity levels, early on in your life, that you had those opportunities?
I think like most kids, most teenagers, um, I just didn't want some of it at the time. I feel like my dad had always been really good about trying to shoot resources and things my way. Like, I remember him maybe when I was still in high school or early college sending me like some personal finance related stuff, stuff in the vein of like Rich Dad, Poor Dad, something like that. And of course, when you're at a certain age, you're a little bit reluctant because you're trying to figure out who you are. You're trying to, not just be who your parents say, but I think it may have really hit me how great some of those opportunities and exposures were when I really got into the core of my business college coursework and just
Interesting.
Realizing that, man, maybe some of this theory seems new, or that's cool. I've never heard it explained that way, but already understanding the application and already having a lot of the real world kind of understanding of running a business. I think that was one of my first ahas.
Okay. No, that's really, and that says a lot for what experience really is, right? And in the culture we find ourselves today, where stuff rules the day, sometimes that experience piece of it really gets kind of pushed to the side. But I can only imagine, on a trip or places you went, with your family growing up, the conversations that you had, that
Sure.
I'm sure, and I'm not trying to speak your story for you, but I'm sure have been realized in where you're at today in those conversations, and they created something in you that really has transpired over those years.
We are very much a product of our environment, and I think Allie and I are both really lucky to have been raised in great families.
Yeah.
Good
Yeah.
deal. Did you love travel early on? Like, did you embrace it, or not just like the trip with dad, or did you guys take family vacations and you look forward to that?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I wouldn't say that anything my family did. It was very kind of your typical American vacation. We would take a road trip to Florida or whatever, and I never dreaded it. We know and have met a lot of people, even just through having these conversations, that are like, I just could not do what you guys are doing. But yeah, I've always liked to travel. I think when I first really caught the bug, we took a mission trip when I was about 15 to Peru.
Okay.
With Compassion International. And I think that
Yeah.
was the first time really that I got to look outside my bubble and realize just how different other parts of the world are, just how different other people live. And, of course, in an experience like that, it's kind of a, man, how blessed are we kind of situation. And yet I was blown away at that age to be in someone's one bedroom house that 7 people live in with a dirt floor, and asking them if we could pray for them, and their response basically being like, no, could we pray for you? Like, we're perfectly happy and content, and just seeing that, it was a real perspective rocker. And so I think that was truly maybe when I first caught the bug.
Wow. Okay. Absolutely. That's a humbling experience for sure.
Yeah.
To have, when we have, these perceptions of people and cultures and subcultures, and we as Americans want to save everything, and a lot of times we're actually what needs to be saved. And That's a really cool.
Yeah.
We could probably have a whole conversation just on that, in and of itself. But Allie, all right, you made him go first, and we ended on a pretty good spot right there. So here you go. It's all.
No, it's so very similar. I was very fortunate to have both of my parents in the household as well. But a little bit different. I grew up in central southern Arkansas in a very, very small farm town. So
Okay.
1,000 people ish.
Wow.
Yeah. And around my family, so my dad's side of the family. So it was the situation where my grandparents lived down like a block from me. My aunt was
Okay.
my third grade teacher. All of my cousins were around all of the time. And I'm a twin, so that's.
Are you really? Okay.
Yeah, I have an identical twin sister. So that kind of brings some of its own nuances to growing up, because that's a built-in best friend, but then you're also, constantly being confused for someone else.
Identity crisis.
Yeah. But yeah, my parents were both hard workers too. I watched both my parents work full-time jobs. My mom was a real estate agent. And my dad was a research farmer. So, he was, always in the field. So unlike Nick, I didn't travel at all because my dad was, in the fields during the summer. He was planting. So, I was on the back of tractors when I was like 12, 13 years old, like watching him. He was like making me grab 50-pound bags of soybeans to help him like sort stuff. So he involved
Right on.
at a very young age. He didn't have sons, so I think he like kind of but one thing I'll say is the men on that side of my family, like my dad and my grandpa in particular, they're both very intelligent men. So that kind of shaped me from a really young age. They really pushed us to be super inquisitive. And very independent, I would say. A very vivid memory in my mind growing up. I was maybe 13 or 14 years old. My dad set me and my sister down and was like, look, I'm not going to be there to help you make all of the decisions for the rest of your life. So you need to start figuring out some things on your own. You don't have to always come to me for permission. You've got to make your own mistakes. You've got to figure things out on yourself. And I would say that allowed me to be like, open my eyes to, I am independent. I've got to be strong enough to like do this thing. Right. So, I'm really fortunate for that and very thankful. Because I did, I went off, I went to college, I did all those things. And I, think, I owe a lot of that to how they raised me in being, an independent individual, very inquisitive. But yeah, I mean, I grew up on the back of a tractor.
Did you give her grief for that, Nick? Nah, there you go. I like it. So, no, what I hear in both of you and the expressions of gratitude towards who have raised you, and that's, I think, a really key thing that I find something in common with successful people, ambitious people, is that no matter if you grew up in utter despair and poverty, or if you came from a lot, the ability to have gratitude in both, I think, is a common thread that definitely comes through, and you guys just briefly sharing about that. Now, what were your goals as teenagers, young adults entering college? Like, what did you want to do? How were you going to change the world in your youth, right? A couple years ago.
I think one of my big ones was always making sure that whatever I ended up doing, it was around people. I love people. I'm a connector in that way. So I still don't know what I want to do with my life, but I do know that it's always going to focus around people, because I think people are the most important. So that's kind of one thing that I knew for sure. And I always knew one of my goals was like, when I went to college, I was like, I'm going to try my hardest. Like, I'm maximal effort while I'm here. I can remember the first time I like failed a math test.
Oh no.
And I told my dad, I was like, oh my gosh, I'm not cut out for college. And he was like, you failed one time, like you've got 4 years or whatever for this. So those are kind of my big two, just effort and making sure to make that connectivity, whatever I ended up doing.
Wow.
Yeah, I'm going to struggle to say anything here that is, all that inspiring. But for transparently, for a lot of my adolescent life, I struggled with my weight. I was a bigger guy, and basically, leaving high school and my first couple years of college, my goals all centered around getting my health in check. And I basically, I just remember hitting that breaking point at one point. I don't know if it was being on this college campus with like a bunch of the prettiest girls I'd ever seen. I don't know what it was, but over the course of a couple of years, I lost about 60 pounds.
Wow.
And really that was my mission. That was my goal. And then, of course my faith has been very, very important in my life. And, but yeah, I can't remember any, this is how I'm going to change the world kind of goal. It was a little more selfish than that, I would say.
No, but if that's the, immediate hurdle that you have to overcome, and
Sure.
You're aware of it, owning that in that moment, and then, having success like you clearly have had, with that, that's in and of itself something pretty phenomenal. I think that's inspiring to so many people, especially I think we're in an age where, where Americans aren't the healthiest people. However, what I will say is I think that needle is moving. I really do.
Yeah.
That people are trying to better themselves.
Well, and the principles there. As Stephen Covey says in the 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, private victory comes before public victory. And so through that process, I had to learn self-control. I had to learn discipline. And then as things began moving, like, I've developed self-confidence. My mind is working better than it was when I was 30, 40 pounds heavier. And it just becomes this iterative snowball effect that, I do believe your physical health is like the keystone principle of how effective you can be in the rest of your life.
Yeah. And as soon as you don't have your health, you very quickly become aware of it.
Yeah.
Because at that point, really nothing else matters.
Absolutely.
You have to, whether it's the common cold or, you find that awful diagnosis come your way, you need to address it. And unfortunately, some people don't, or they don't realize the pitfall that they're in. So no, I think that's a lot of wisdom for all of us to hear in that. Well, you were seeing all these pretty girls at college, and so how did you all meet?
Well, like the day and age of the internet, we met on Tinder, the dating
All
app.
right.
Yeah.
Did you really? Oh my goodness.
So we were both in grad school at the University of Arkansas at the time. You were finishing your MBA, and I was finishing up my first year of my master's degree in media studies. And we both swiped right, and we went on a date. The funny part of that is we met, and 3 weeks later, in 3 weeks, Nick graduated with your MBA, and he left the States for how many days?
Like 32 days.
32 days for a trip in Europe. God. So he went on this big trip 3 weeks after I met this man and was like, I want to be with you. But then he left for a month. But
nice to meet you. See ya.
I'm going to go off on all these cool adventures.
We still talked every day. Don't act like
every day. We decided to read a book together to kind of like build some foundational things for our relationship. So we read Boundaries. Wow. I'm not going to even pretend like I remember the author's name to you.
Henry Cloud. Henry Cloud?
Townsend. Townsend.
I'll have to look it up.
But yeah, so we read a book together during those 32 days, all based on how do you set boundaries in relationships and with the people that you want, so that, it's so easy when you start relationships to kind of start to lose identity, like yourself, because you're becoming one versus two. But so we did that. And yeah, basically inseparable from that moment. And then we got married in 2017.
Mm-hmm.
So
Okay.
And
Wow.
Peter would not sponsor the wedding. We
I hope you tried.
yeah. So that's kind of it. We're both, I think, just in kind of the perfect spots where, we were in these transitional states. We had just finished some like crazy endeavors from an academic standpoint and kind of starting life. It was kind of a perfect time to start life together.
All right. I got to ask this. You might, if you need to take a minute, take a minute. What did you learn about yourself, Nik, when you met Allie and you guys started your journey? You're in marriage counseling now.
Yeah.
Sorry, you didn't know.
Choosing my words very carefully. No. Allie is an Enneagram type 2, which if you're listening.
Flesh it out for those that may not know.
Sure, yeah. So if you don't know, the Enneagram is a popular personality test. It's actually very, very old, but it's definitely seen a resurgence in the past years. And there are 9 types. I won't list them all off, but the Enneagram type 2, the personality is the helper. I am an Enneagram type 3, which is the achiever. So a lot of my motivation in life is I want other people to be proud of me, and I want to be proud of myself. And I'm kind of just laying some context here. So
yeah.
What did I learn about myself? First of all, I think like how a healthy relationship works. I think leading up to that point, sorry to anybody who I dated before Allie that's going to hear this, but it was just always difficult. And there was always, I think, a lot of friction that maybe I was just willing to live with. I'm not sure. But, when in meeting Allie, like one of the first things I noticed was just how it worked. And I think part of that reason is because our motivations work together so well. She was just always such an encourager to me. And I think I found out like how much I needed that. I think I found out how much I needed a conversation partner where, we can both listen to each other and really support one another. And yeah, I don't know. When we first met, I think I was always just taken aback by like, it felt like we had known each other our whole lives.
Yeah.
Huh.
And it just worked.
That's like the best answer ever.
You're just saying it so you don't have to answer the same question.
No, that's good.
Is there something though, Allie, that comes to mind when you and Nik started your journey that a level of self-awareness and really became tangible and real? Is there anything that stands out if you it doesn't have to be?
I think same thing with like just the level of support that you provided for me. I think I felt that too. Cause not sorry for past boyfriends over this. Like I came out of a relationship that was very unhealthy before. And so I very much lost who I was. And I loved how Nik always supported me to be who I was and who I wanted to be. So I really always loved that. Also, I love to cook and Nik loves to eat. So
that works.
Things, I really got to, do that. So yeah, no, I think the support thing is really foundational to what I would say our relationship is around.
Yeah. When you first met, did you realize in each other in the early stages what faith was going to mean to both of you? Or is that something was that an early boundary that you set up, like, hey, these are non-negotiables? Or what was that like as you incorporated your beliefs and how you grew up and into your marriage?
Yeah. And it's something I was honestly really nervous about. And so I think it was like date number 3 or 4 where I finally bridged that topic, which, by the way, dates 1 through 4 were like all maybe within like 7 or 8 days of each other. I mean, but yeah, I just remember, bridging that topic and being extremely pleased that, both of us were very aligned, which I had not always had in past relationships, and was a big friction point. But yeah, it was, obviously we were both on Tinder, and I think neither of us were, there for some of the reasons that people use Tinder.
Yeah, that's
we were both in a stage of life where we were looking for a partner. And so I think maybe being at the age we were at, and just where we were in our stage of life, I think we were very intentional about like, I am looking for a partner. And yeah, so for me, faith was a non-negotiable component. And it was like, that was just another way that it worked.
Yeah. No, that's an important one to, I think, in me trying to even piece together of the little bit I know about you guys, is that component and those boundaries that you obviously established and worked through early on has to be a component that makes what you're doing now work.
Yeah.
Which I definitely we'll tackle that more here in a little bit when we talk about kind of where you're currently at. But what was the first year of marriage like? What at that point, when you guys are, now having to establish goals as a family unit, what was life going to be like? What was the trajectory?
Yeah. I mean, I think as with anyone who gets married, there's that time period where you're like trying to figure out. I had been living alone at that point for like almost 2 years. And Nick, you always had loads of roommates around you. So for me personally, I mean, part of that was just like learning how to integrate life, like from a household standpoint with another individual. Not that I do things in any particular way, but you learn those like little nuances about each other that you're like, hey dude, you can't just like throw your socks on the ground or whatever,
She keeps throwing me under the bus, man.
I'll tell you what, you're gonna need to pick those up.
Yeah, so for me, that was probably like kind of the biggest thing was, like us moving me out of my apartment, and like I'm sobbing about like this piece of my life is going away, but it's all for the better because like we're so much better together. So that was kind of the, the first years you're just kind of like learning things about each other and like how to do daily life, but it was so fun. Like we traveled a lot, obviously, because this is what this is all about, but just trying to figure out what that looks like. And I think both of us were kind of just in that head start of our careers as well. So you're trying to figure out what that looks like for yourself. And, that's such a different pivot from being in academia into full-fledged careers. And you're trying to like get accustomed to that. So, I mean, it's a lot of change at one time. But I think that's the good thing about having such great support is like both of us could come home, and if we had a hard day, like we're not ones to just bottle it up. It's like, let's talk it out. Oh my gosh, you had a bad day. Like what happened? Let's process this together. Like something's not going right at work for you. Like how can I help you? And like you're like my personal business coach in that sense, So
yeah, I think the one thing I remember is both of us brought some debt. Oh, yeah. And so, like both of us have said, we had great childhoods. And I think like early on our relationship just kind of worked. And I think one of the reasons is because we're good friends. And I think we want to be spending a lot of time together. In the book, 7 Principles for Making Marriage Work, they talk about one of the keys to a successful marriage is creating love maps, which is essentially like developing a shared language and like over time kind of writing a story together. And I feel like from day one, we've had that. In terms of, year one marriage struggle, I would say one thing that I, as the guy who put on the CFO hat for our marriage, was we both brought some debt into this thing. And I remember sitting in my office and like on my whiteboard, kind of writing out the whole tally of everything. Both of us had student loans. We had car payments. We had, a couple other things. And so, I grew up in a home that was pretty debt averse, and I was pretty, how would I say this? I was pretty like
aggressive.
Yeah. At the very beginning of like, we are getting rid of this as fast as we can.
Yeah.
Okay.
No, that's a really good call, because the way, money is emotional. And the way that we were raised around money was different. Not that one way was right or one way was wrong. It's just we had different views on that. And I know when we took marriage counseling before we got married through our church, this massive aptitude test, that was like the one area that we're like, look, it's not that you aren't compatible. You guys have different views. So this could be a tension point. And I do remember it being like, why am I getting emotional about this? Like, what you've laid out in front of me is really great, but it's hard, And I think that's kind of the hurdle, because you want all the niceties and pleasures, and what you're talking about doing is the opposite of that. So, anyways, I think that's a really good one.
And I think it was, because of our different mindsets around it, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but I think maybe part of the emotion came from almost like a sense of guilt.
Yeah, because I brought more debt to the table. So,
but I never saw it that way. I just saw it as like, hey, we're a team. We're going to tackle this together.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Well, and it's always hard in early on in marriage to realize that, okay, you've reached this kind of pinnacle of something you've been driving towards for so long in the marriage, and then you want to have all these experiences, and you want to have the income of a person married for 20 years, and you want to live that life. But there's a very quick realization that it's like, we have to get this in check. And it's fortunate that you both were able to see that early on, because that's not everybody's story, for sure.
Definitely.
Absolutely. Well, so what you're doing now is, you've taken a massive leap into a different lifestyle, is my understanding. And would you just kind of lay out, one, what you're doing now with your life and your perspective and your pursuits, but at what point, I'm very interested in the transition, because everyone that's going to be hearing this may be saying, like you've heard from our people, well, I can't do that. I don't live that way. I don't do this. All the excuses we make for ourselves or give ourselves permission not to live that type of life. I'm very curious about the transition, and okay, we're going to take on the risk, and whatever that risk was, I'm curious about that.
All right. How much time do you have?
Hey, it's a podcast. We're good to go.
So I'll start with what we're doing now. What we are doing now is Allie and I are currently 3 months in to a 6-month self-funded sabbatical where we've been traveling full time. So we are currently in country number 12. We're in Thailand, which I don't remember if you said that at the top of the show or not, but we're in northern Thailand currently. We spent about 3 months in Europe, and then we made the jump over here to Thailand about 2 weeks ago. So that's what we're doing. We are currently not working. Both of us left our jobs. And so the preparation for this, we took quite a bit of time to get prepared, and I can kind of go all the way back to the beginning of what was the idea, how did it start, and so I mentioned our debt, which I think is like maybe a good groundwork for this. In order to tackle that, which I'm happy to say that now we're debt free, I got real into personal finance and started to realize, I mean, I always kind of liked self-help type stuff, personal development, but really fell into that genre, that personal finance, and over time became aware of the financial independence movement, or some people call it the FIRE movement, financial independent, retire early. And so we started aggressively working toward, hey, what would it look like to retire early? Mm-hmm. And we were saving a lot. We were making, some personal sacrifices, and I think it was an episode of one of the bigger financial independence podcasts where I heard someone talking about a mini retirement. And I'd never heard of this before, but basically it was a person who took 3 months off, 6 months off, a year off. And so I was really intrigued by that. And it kind of made me uncomfortable a little bit. But I sought out more content related to that, and really just fell in love with the idea. As we've kind of already talked about, I had that travel bug from a young age. After Allie and I met, I went on that big trip. So I really enjoyed travel, and there was something, there was a hunger just to do something big. And so hearing about this mini retirement, it scratched an itch for me, because don't get me wrong, we liked the idea of retiring early. But I didn't necessarily like the idea of hunkering down and like eating rice and beans for 10 years so that then we could start really enjoying what we want to do.
And you are self-aware enough to know that you were never not going to work. So it's like the idea of like retiring at 40, like what happens for the next 30 years?
Exactly.
Like you weren't going to not work in a sense. So right. I think there was kind of some self-awareness around that. And then also just the idea, I think, for you of like pausing big goals and waiting, like, fortunately we're very able-bodied people when we're young right now. There was no guarantee for the future on,
Yeah, no, that's a
what
huge
that looks
point.
like,
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Sorry, I jumped in.
No, that's great.
No, that's Nick. Can I interrupt you for a second? The part you said a minute ago, how this idea of taking some time or early retirement or whatever it would be made you uncomfortable. Did it make you uncomfortable because like that's not how it's supposed to work? Like this is a map of how you're supposed to live well, and it doesn't fit that? Or was it just that why didn't it resonate or sit with you?
I think it's so cool we started the podcast the way we did, because there's already so much backstory. Like it bucked every ounce of conventional wisdom I had ever heard, and then anything I had seen, like by my very hardworking folks. Like my dad with his business, he built a business that he was going to love running, and I don't think it was ever like a let me scale this so I can sell it kind of thing. Like he built something he wanted to do. So my whole life I had seen people working hard on repeat. And then like you take, when you need a break or when you want to spend some family time, you take a week-long vacation somewhere, and so for me, I think it made me uncomfortable because it sort of went against the grain of, I think, what a lot of society does. And then what a lot of what I saw in my immediate family. Plus now I'm married, and like, if I wanted to do that, it's like, I'm not just on my own. Like I got to get Allie on board, and who knows what she'll think about it. I think that was why.
Okay. All right. Right on. So where'd the pitch come in for what you were learning?
I think that there were so many iterations that it's kind of a blur on honestly how we ended up like where we ended up, because you did talk to me about like we were working towards fire. We were like, this is something that we can do. And then we were like, yeah, but is that really going to fit in with like our lifestyle and what we wanted to do? And then you brought mini retirement to the table. And I'll be honest, like I was obstinate for a very long time. I mean, we probably had that conversation for maybe even like 8 or 9 months, maybe even longer, like that you had known about this concept and talked to me about this concept. And mentally, like I just could not wrap my head around that. Because again, like against the grain of conventional wisdom, that this, like, how are we supposed to do this? And, all of these kinds of things. So this had been a topic in our household for quite some time. And then it transformed into, I worked for a global creative agency in the kind of Walmart world, and they had global offices. So then it transformed for a brief second into, okay, well, if we're not going to do this mini retirement, we really love being abroad. Like, what would it look like for us to do a brief stint where through my organization, it facilitates a global move for a brief period of time, like 2-3 years, like let's just go live in Germany. And I'd actually had conversations with leadership on that. We were down that path, and then COVID hit, and it was like, oh,
game changer.
Okay, this isn't actually probably going to be possible anymore. Because, some of our family plans included children after 5 years of marriage, which we're coming up on in June. So it was like, well, we don't want
Was that a reminder?
I think it was.
Just checking.
So we didn't want to be away from our family during that time. So COVID kind of threw a loop for that. So then Nick revisited this idea of like, I really want to do this. And I'll be honest, it was him through his mastermind group coming across some YouTubers called, their names are Karen. They're from Nashville. About 5 years ago, they quit their jobs and went and traveled abroad for a full year. And I think seeing someone who was similar to us, like a married couple in their 20s doing this thing, made me realize, like, why am I automatically closing myself off to an opportunity? Like, instead of seeing it as an opportunity, I kept seeing all of these things that we're going to have to figure out as roadblocks. I was like, what about my career? What about our house? What about our dogs? These roadblocks kept me from even thinking about the bigger picture of how awesome this thing would be. And I'll be honest, it was one of those things where I'm a very resolute person for the most part. So I went to sleep, and while I was sleeping, I was just like, why? I'm just going to say yes. And I woke up the next morning and I was like, let's do it. And Nick was like, what? And I was like, let's do it. Let's go. We'll figure out how long this is. And once I opened myself up to that opportunity, what we originally talked about was 3 months turned into, okay, well, now we have all these places we want to go. Okay, well, what if it was 4 months? And now here we are, it's like 6 months, and there's like no real return home date. And so it just grew from there into something like completely life altering, all because I opened myself up to the idea. You were sold. You were ready.
No, I think that's a huge point because when we think about roadblocks and things that prevent us from doing things, we're constantly looking for, well, if this gets put in place and that gets put in place and then this happens, then maybe I can entertain that.
Right.
And we want to have all the knowns, come to fruition and stay as far away from the unknowns as possible, which is humanity in and of itself. But that is a huge thing, I think, that people perseverate on constantly. And that's difficult. Now, did you have other folks, mentors or anybody that you had in this conversation? Obviously you guys have drawn close, you know each other, you have these ambitions. but were there other people speaking into your life, whether for or against any of these ideas? Did you bring people into this?
Yeah. I think that's like my biggest piece of advice for anyone who's looking to do something like this is the best thing that helped me was surrounding myself with content and people that supported the idea, that had lived that life. Like if you put your support system around you that helps encourage that, then it does make it easier. So, in the day and age of YouTube, like there are loads of YouTubers out there that have done this exact thing, digital nomads. Everyone does it in a their own flavor. But we just like went down this rabbit hole of all of these different YouTube channels of full-time travelers. How do they do it? What is that? And couples, specifically couple YouTube travelers who were traveling full-time. But then, I know you had your mastermind group that was a really great sounding board for, how do we solve some of the problems that we had? If we needed to figure out what to do with our house and make sure that our mortgage got paid for while we were gone, like what are some really, unique solutions to that problem? So that was a really great group. We honestly kind of kept it close to the chest because it was a 15-month planning adventure for us. Like it's a big idea, so it deserved the time to plan it out appropriately and spend the time on it. So, we didn't tell our parents until about 6 months into the planning, when we really solidified that this was something we were going to do. We had figured out some of the big hurdles so that when we presented the idea to our family, who honestly, minds were, I think, a little bit blown because it doesn't meet what the community was. They didn't have to worry about us because it was like, we're laying out the plan. We're not telling you the idea. We're telling you this is the plan to execute that.
Which was very important because something like this, I think at first blush, seems totally counter to both of our personality types. Like we are the type A, kind of oldest child personality. This just like did not seem like anything that Nik or Allie would do.
Climbing the career ladder, like, I had made quite a few jumps in my career, and that just didn't kind of mesh with that. There are quite a few, different avenues of podcasts and books and resources. Nik went deep, and I'm sure we can talk about this, down the points and miles game. There's a whole slew of resources in that avenue. So once we eventually started telling friends and family, they were very supportive. I will say, like, again, for anyone who's looking to do this, I think you have to have strong personal conviction, because not everyone we told was like gung ho about it. Like, we didn't always receive the reaction that we anticipated of like, oh, that's amazing. Like it doesn't make sense to some people. And so you're not always going to receive the reaction that you anticipate that you would receive.
And I think I had to remind myself with that. And then I wanted to speak to one other thing. Like I had to remind myself, we were never met with, oh, that's dumb, that's not going to work. Like never. A lot of our very close friends who love us and want us to be happy even heard what we said and kind of blank stares almost. It was kind of a reaction like, oh, wow, that's cool. But you could see, and as I figured it out, the more times we had to deliver it, like people are processing, right? And in our case, I think they were thinking about, okay, these guys have decent jobs. They own their house. Like, people are jumping to the how, right? And I think I attribute one of the ways we succeeded in doing this was setting some big, scary goals without asking how at first. It was just, here's what we're going to do. It was I heard Tony Robbins talk about this recently. JFK said, we're putting a man on the moon in the next 10 years. He didn't go into how. And I'm sure a bunch of folks at NASA were like, what is he saying? Like, we can't, but setting those goals without getting caught up in the how are we going to do it. Just know, for anybody who's listening that may try and do something similar, or you're launching a business or whatever it is, as you start to bring people in, it may not always be met with cheerleaders, but don't always take the blank stare or the non-enthusiastic response as a negative or an opposition. I think a lot of times people are just trying to figure it out, or maybe sometimes they're even like thinking, man, I wish I could do something like that, and so I think it brings on some mixed emotions. I wanted to say this about something she said earlier, related to the mastermind group, related to the content we were consuming. I know it's a statement that could kind of be a little played in our circles at this point, but it's true. And it's one of my favorites. And that is, you are the average of the 5 people you spend the most time with. And so for me, that came from my mastermind group and some other, close friends and brothers, where iron could really sharpen iron. But yeah, I think we just started to, in everything we consumed, surrounded ourselves with either people who had done it or resources that would help us in different aspects of the journey that really helped us sort of build this. And I definitely would not change that.
No.
Yeah.
No, I wouldn't either.
Yeah, I hear so much intentionality in what you all are saying, and that prevents you from drifting, and that is going to kill a vision very quickly. Mm-hmm. And I definitely, that's coming through really loud and clear in the message that you all are delivering here. Let's be as practical as we can for a minute.
Sure.
So thinking about, okay, you kind of set some context about 15 months, and what does planning something like this look like? And I know it's probably it takes up walls and notebooks, but if you can even get it down to some simple steps, that it's like, hey, get these principles aligned, and these are the things you need to pursue.
Yeah,
for sure. I will say I remember the day, and like precisely our very first session of doing this, sitting down in my office, and the first thing I did was I opened a blank note. And what we started with was about a 3-4 hour session of just, why do we want to do this in the first place? Why? And we just went through a list. It wasn't pretty. It was just a brainstorm of what are our reasons, because that was going to be our fuel. And knowing that this was going to take some time, and also knowing that there was a pandemic happening, and there was going to be plenty of reasons not to. I knew we were going to need fuel for the journey. So number one was establishing our why. And then kind of right under that was moving into what is it that we're doing? What are we doing, and what are we not doing? Yeah. Right. And so I actually put together a very short ebook that kind of talks through this process.
Awesome.
It's called a Guide to Going Away. And it's sort of I would say, volume 1 of kind of the rough aspects of how could somebody put something like this together. And I've got actually a page we can send to your folks for free to get the ebook.
Awesome.
That's how it began, was just a big planning session. What is our why, and what is our what? And I'm already kind of a nerd about that stuff. There were times where I had to sort of
Allie's laughing. She's like, that was like a laughing agreement from Allie right there.
You're like an Evernote junkie. And I'm more of a it happens, and this is over here, and I'll kind of float over here towards it. And so, I mean, I think that really helped with our personality types coming together for that. But yeah, sometimes you were it's man, you got to slow down a minute more, catch up a little bit on this.
I want to stay on this train. Don't leave me.
The next component was really just rough drafting the money component. Mm-hmm. Obviously, if we're saying we're not going to work for a certain period of time, and we want to travel, which I think in most people's minds, travel is expensive. Yeah. how do we do that? So, practically, first there was just the math aspect of, okay,
what are expenses versus what we bring in versus how much do we need to save?
right.
Out there's a lot of people that are research on, if you're going to do this based on what type of traveler you are, how much do you need daily? Candidly, like we are set around $100 a day, which honestly puts us living cheaper abroad than it does at home, which I think shocks a lot of people when you talk about that. But it's called, pretty much geographic arbitrage. It's a whole thing where, you live somewhere that it's cheaper based on the dollar that you make in another area.
So and for example, where we currently are in Thailand, Chiang Mai is like one of the largest expat communities in the world. I think there's about 20,000 expats here.
Wow.
Now the weather is beautiful. The Thai people are so kind and friendly. Of course, the food is amazing. Thai food is my favorite. But I think a big driver of that is just the cost. So a lot of people retire early to
live here,
Thailand, and a lot in this part of Thailand simply because they need so much less to retire. Or people come over here to start a business simply because they can get to profitability much faster. So, how much we need was partially influenced by where we want to go, or kind of vice versa. It sort of played all together. We knew that we probably weren't going to spend a ton of time in a place like Australia, which is a bit more expensive. Not saying we don't want to go there someday, but for this trip, it just didn't really fit some of our criteria. So when we laid out, why we want to do this, and then sort of what we want to do, well, we want to not work for 6 months. We want to travel to X number of places. Like, we began to create parameters for ourselves that then helped us figure out and then set the right kind of goals and figure out how to tackle them. So, from a money standpoint, there was the time aspect, there was the location aspect, and then there was just tactically, okay, how far can we stretch our dollar where we're going? How long are we going to give ourselves to prepare? And there were times where I felt like, man, is 15 months too long? It worked out great, but there were times where I was afraid of losing steam or losing momentum. And that's why it's so important on the front end to establish that why. But then, so that length of time, it influenced, okay, how much can we save? But then I also got really into points and miles, travel rewards. Some people call it travel hacking. And that simply just started through learning about credit card sign-up bonuses. Where, you can, if you've ever flown on an airplane and you've heard them, talk about
you always get the pitch.
You may have heard that pitch before, but the general premise for anybody listening who may not know is credit card companies almost always will offer some kind of sign-up bonus for signing up for the card and then meeting a minimum spending requirement within the first X number of months. So, for example, spend $3,000 in the first 3 months after opening the card and get an 80,000 point bonus. Those points are, depending on the card, basically a digital currency. They predated crypto. It really was like the first digital currency, but they're specifically used to be redeemed on, if it's an airline card, it's air travel. If it's, a hotel card, it's hotels. But there are some other cards that their points go to, you can transfer them to airlines or hotels, or you can use them for these other things.
It's just like an industry specific type transfer.
And I think part of that was like one of our bullet points of goals too was, I don't remember the percentage number you threw out, but like,
I wanted to pay for 50% of our trip using points and miles.
In terms of hotels or lodging and airfare, which at the end of the day are the
Your
largest
major expenses.
for any daily budget.
Was that based on your $100 a day projection or your research on what the individual like places would cost in estimating that?
It was a mix, it's kind of a
Okay.
chicken or the egg type of thing. I think just with the amount of time and energy we were putting into this, it was just sort of a tapestry that slowly kind of came together. It's not a perfect science. It was a little bit of art sometimes.
It allowed for a buffer, basically.
Yeah.
Like, if we had $100 a day, whether we were paying for a place for points or not, would help indicate what we could go and do for that day. And then allowed for that buffer of maybe like at the end of this trip, we come in at $90 a day. And then that's like pat on the back. But if we came in at $120 a day, at least we got airfare paid for or whatever. So
yeah. Have you felt in any way, because of having to plan that specifically because of the duration, does that kill spontaneity at all? Have you been able to adjust and like just pivot, be like, we were going to do this, but now we're doing this?
I'll tell you what has been amazing for spontaneity. COVID-19.
Okay.
The pandemic has killed our plans many times.
Which, like, woe is me kind of thing, right? Like, we're very fortunate. Not a lot of people are traveling right now. It's kind of a weird thing to say that, like, it's kind of a good time to travel, but also, like, it's to each and every person's like individual perspective on health and safety and that kind of thing. Countries are open, right? And tourism and people's livelihoods need that for some of the countries that we're visiting. So
100%,
that kind of thing. But yeah, what we put on paper originally 15 months ago has not happened because countries have closed down. They've gone on brief lockdowns. They've opened back up. It's kind of been all over the place, but that's allowed for a lot of spontaneity. Like, we didn't plan on going to Poland. We went to Poland.
And it was one of our favorite places.
It's one of our favorite places.
And yeah. So I think just to add something to what you said, like, I definitely don't want to encourage someone to take a risk or be irresponsible. But our experience has been there are not a ton of people traveling right now. And so, if you're willing to take the necessary precautions and you're willing to
deal with the paperwork,
deal with the administration, and then like also learn what the rules are in different places, it can be an awesome time to travel. I'll give one example. We're here in Thailand. We went about an hour north earlier this week to a place called Elephant Nature Park. And basically it's like an animal shelter for elephants. They've rescued elephants that were, maybe in kind of shadier situations, but they have over 100 elephants there. And then also, buffalo, and then they've taken in a lot of like dogs and cats and stuff. That place is one of the most popular attractions in Thailand. Normally they see thousands of people in a day. We booked the normal experience that you would book, and we ended up basically having a private tour. Hanging out with over 100 elephants, getting to feed elephants.
What an experience. Yeah.
We didn't have to wait in line or anything and that's kind of been our experience. So even though we've had to sort of flex and be nimble and be patient with, we thought we were going to Romania, but now we can't, let's go here instead. There have been a lot of bright spots too.
Yeah.
Man, that's awesome. How are you managing relationships? And I'm sure you all were close friends of other people that relied on you, that counted on your companionship. And I'm sure you all have spoken truth and wisdom into other people's lives. But what I guess is the reception of you kind of being away from those close relationships, and how are you managing that? Have you had tough conversations with friends? And, what does it mean to be a good friend, and how can I be there for you? And I'm doing this, amazing thing with my life. I'm curious if you could speak around that a little bit.
Yeah. I mean, I think the we miss our friends and family. That's like first and foremost. We miss them a lot. I think one thing we've learned through this sabbatical is that like we don't have any aspirations to be full-time travelers, just because we do miss those relationships at home. And I think one thing that this has taught us is that we both want to be better about facilitating those relationships at home, because it is one of those things where it's like you don't know what you have till you lose, right? Like you don't know how important those relationships are to your life until it's a lot harder to make that connection, or you don't have it, all that stuff. Like, so one of our big goals when we go home is just like facilitating our relationships better, and making sure we're like breathing life into those relationships better than we were when we were at home. I mean, the great thing about like today, like we've Skyped with friends, we make sure we have phone calls and FaceTime, there's still, it's not the same, but there's connectivity there. We started a YouTube channel and we're making videos of all the things we're doing. So it feels like our family can like watch what we're doing on the day to day. So, I mean, I think there's that part, but I definitely think traveling and being away from them for a long time has been really eye-opening on how much more we want to connect with those individuals and make sure that they're like a central part of our life when we go home.
Yeah, absolutely. What, when you were planning, what was the goal to like, what was this going to accomplish in your life? What was the grand, like, was it just, it seems to me it has to be more than just the adventure, right?
100%.
There has to be, we are becoming better people individually, better people for each other because of this. And how do you keep that in the forefront as you go through this experience that you're having, and then have it align with the goal at the end?
When I think now about why we did this, and certainly there are some personal reasons for us, but when I think of three big reasons for why anybody should do this, there are three that come to mind. Sabbath, which is rest. I think as Americans in particular, like rest is not in our DNA.
Right.
We look for any excuse to get out of rest. I don't remember the exact percentage, but the number of people who let their vacation time go unused every year is staggering. And so I think that's a big part of it. Rest is just something we need. In his book, The Ruthless Elimination of Hurry, John Mark Comer says, if you go against the grain of the universe, you get splinters. And rest is just something we need. It's something God put in us. And even in the Old Testament, the Israelites were to let the ground lie every 7 years. And that was an exercise of rest, but it was also an exercise in trust and faith. And so for me, that was a big part of it, was just, hey, let's rest. And I'll be honest, like, I'm a driven guy. I want to go. But I knew that it was something we needed and that would be refreshing to our soul. Obviously, number two is the travel, the adventure component, which we've talked a lot about. And that's definitely scratching an itch for us.
That's kind of our, when we first sat down and started talking about like our family and stuff, that's a shared purpose that we have. And I think it's really important when, you find your person, like it honestly works so well when you guys have shared purpose. And so travel being a shared purpose for us, that allowed this thing to come to life in a way that it never felt like a hassle. And it allows us, I feel like, to feel so much more connected while we're here, because it's something that we both want to do, and we both find a lot of like comfort and growth in that purpose together.
And then the final piece is to focus on what matters and to gain some clarity. Right now we are in the midst of what has been dubbed the Great Resignation or the Big Quit. And I think contrary to what the news wants to tell everyone, it's not just about pain. I think the pandemic and then, many of the things that have transpired over the past couple of years have forced people to take stock. And I think number one, to realize that, hey, life is precious. Life is short. Am I doing what I was meant to do? Am I doing what I've always wanted to do? So I think you have teachers who are so burned out, and you have doctors who are so burned out that they need Sabbath of their own, right? I think you do have people where their pay is not fair and maybe not keeping up with inflation, but I think there is a significant portion of people that are in that camp of, am I really doing what I want to do with my life? And so Sabbatical, to me, part of this was a perfect opportunity for us to pause and to reflect and to gain clarity on where are we headed. And the shared purpose component of that, there's been research done that families who travel together create these shared kind of milestone experiences that help get you through the tough times. There's been research done that says that couples who travel together have a lower likelihood of divorce. So that was definitely on my mind too. Is just like, I remember writing on our why document. It's like, let's write an extraordinary chapter of our lives that we would be thrilled to tell our kids and grandkids someday.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, that is, man, there's a lot to think through in that. But ultimately, that search and that deep desire for meaning in life is important to contemplate, right? And just to have time to self-reflect, we don't give ourselves permission to do that often enough.
And I think, Steve, like, you're helping me say more concisely what I've been trying to say for the last 5 minutes. But part of this had just been giving ourselves room to process, and I think some people had asked us before exactly what you're asking. Okay, aside from travel, what's this all about? And truly, I think it's been about the journey, and it's been about like just giving ourselves space to breathe and still trying to ask ourselves those questions of not just what am I doing, but who am I becoming?
Yeah, no, very well said. What did you get wrong? I'm curious, and it's kind of maybe a harsh way of saying it, but what are some things that you learned that's like, hey, this was in our plan, this is what we thought this was going to be, but we got it wrong, right? Help us learn maybe from a mistake or two that you've identified in the planning process. And I'm speaking more logistics here, obviously.
I mean, yeah, I think the first one was, for me, would just be how much I do miss some of the things back home and the convenience. Like, I think we always thought like, oh gosh, we're going to go on this thing, we're going to fall in love with travel, and we may never come back. And that is like the exact opposite of what I feel. And I think that you feel too. We thought we'd go on this thing and it could turn into, there are people that end up traveling full time and they love it and that's their lifestyle. And maybe we thought that that's something that we would do, and it's not, because I think it just makes us appreciate what we had back home even more. So I think kind of just that mindset of, I don't think that we could do this full time.
Yeah, I think what we got wrong in the beginning that we seem to be dialing in now is our pace.
Okay.
I think at the beginning, and I thought I was trying to move a little slower, but I think for a trip, we spent our first maybe 20, 30 days treating it just like we would treat
to a week or 2 weeks.
Yeah, a 1 week vacation. And, we were fortunate to get to do some international travel before this. So when I say that, I don't mean like a 7-day beach vacation where you just go hang out. I mean like where you go to Rome and you're hitting a bunch of museums and you're seeing the sights and stuff like that.
Your constant excursions.
Yes. As part of our sabbatical that we took for rest, I didn't build in enough time for us to slow down. And one thing I've learned about Allie, not in our first year of marriage, but in our 5th year of marriage, is I don't need a break as often as she does. But when we do slow down and I take one, it's really, really good for both of us.
Yeah.
So I think that's one thing I got wrong early on.
Yeah. Well, that goes to the push and pull of a relationship. And that is, it's vital to be aware of where maybe you do need to be pushed a little bit and where you need to, this is too much, and communicate that. I can only imagine the level of communication that has to be existing in your relationship in the midst of travel, because it's constant decisions. And I see that as a benefit to travel, is where when we are in the rat race of life, we have a pretty consistent set schedule. Now, we may not execute it the same each week, but we know what to expect. Yeah. And sometimes that is a mitigating factor for the amount of decisions we need to make. But I can only imagine the decisions that you all are constantly have to making, whether it's a language barrier or a money exchange or a missed flight, and whatever the case may be.
You nailed it.
Yeah, we actually met another we actually got to meet Nate from Kara and Nate, the couple that inspired me to actually get to do this.
Right on.
But it was really funny because one of his first questions to us was, so do you guys feel like you fight more? And part of that is common because of just the sheer amount of decision making that you have to have. And hangry is a real thing. It can't be dehydrated, or he is noticing, and just you get tired and you're constantly moving. And I mean, even just trying to follow Google Maps gets annoying, in your hometown, let alone, doing it where you can't read the street signs. And so you hit the nail on the head right there.
Absolutely.
Gosh, no, that's phenomenal. What does transition out of this look like? Because I imagine in the amount of time it takes to move into this lifestyle, there also is going to be that re-entry transition that's going to take a significant amount of thought and planning. And okay, we have to reconnect with family and friends, and we maybe have to get jobs again, and we have to start at the bottom. And am I able to do this? And how will I respond to American culture when I've experienced the world for 6 months? There's so many questions that impact people so differently when they travel. I can think of mission trips where I was gone for 30 days and came back and I wanted nothing to do with the environment I was in. And that's normal transition, but it taught me we need to give more thought to that re-entry decision.
Yeah. I think one of the first things we did actually in the planning stage was kind of think about how much of a buffer are we going to allow ourselves financially when we do return. So Nick, being the financial guru, built us up of enough of an emergency savings that we did give ourselves a buffer when we get home financially to honestly be selective and intentional about how we integrate, specifically talking about careers and jobs, since that takes up most of the time that you spend in your week. So we do have a buffer to be a little bit selective in that sense. For me personally, I want to plug back into the industry that I was working in before we left. I made a lot of connectivity there. I really enjoy that type of work. So I have every intention of plugging back in. And honestly, it's funny because one of my biggest hangups was career. Once people heard that we were doing this, I had people reaching out saying I want to talk, I want to let's have a conversation about when you come back next April, and all kinds of crazy stuff, because you're putting yourself out there and people respect that. So that's my intention is trying to plug back in, but we did allow ourselves a buffer so that we can move back into our house and rest from our sabbatical kind of thing, right? And give ourselves space to reconnect with the people that are important to us. Yours is different.
I think, another thing I've been trying to be mindful about is this is going to shape a lot of the rest of Allie and I's life. Mm-hmm. And although traveling full time for 6 months is very interesting to people, and it's interesting to our family and friends, there's also only so many stories they're going to want to hear. And so I'm kind of re-entering with the knowledge that it will be fuel for us, but I think there will be times at gatherings and whatnot that we're going to have to kind of restrain ourselves. We read a book before we did this called Vagabonding. Mm-hmm. Highly recommend it to anyone considering long-term travel. It's the perfect guide. It's a quick read. It's great on Audible. I think it's about 3.5, 4 hours, but nice. The author kind of even goes into that there. It's like, you're going to be recounting some amazing experience to friends and family that weren't there. And there are many times where it's going to feel like an inside joke that just doesn't land. And so I'm kind of preparing myself for that. It's like the other side of the sabbatical. What blank stares are we going to be seeing again? Yeah. Or the, oh, that's nice.
But I got to hear about Nik and Allie's adventure again tonight.
Exactly. So I'm trying to think about being kind in that way, because people have already had to hear about it so much.
Mm-hmm. Right.
Yeah. You know.
No, that's incredibly wise of you, and I wouldn't have necessarily landed on that myself, but I can think about conversations with folks that, because of an incredible experience, no matter what it is, it seems like that's the only thing that conversation. It's just like, hey, can we not talk about work? Hey, can we not talk about kids tonight? Hey, right. Can we, whatever it is, there are these certain hot topics that you just want to break from. And I want to get to know the person aside from that thing they do or did.
For sure. Yeah.
Well, I'm thinking about transition and coming back. There was one thing. Do you all prior to going, did you set up any type, or do you have businesses like in terms of a passive income coming in? Is that a piece of this for you, or is that something you recommend for people when it comes into budgeting, or it's not something that has to be in place to be able to do this?
I mean, I would highly recommend it. It's not something that we had. It's something that we're standing up now. Mm-hmm. On my end, whether it's a full-time thing or not, just with everything we've learned and with our story, I really have a heart to try and help other people do something like this if they want to. So really, for me, there's kind of two legs to this. There's coaching and kind of being an advisor to anyone who maybe wants to take a sabbatical or who wants to relocate abroad, sort of the mindset, and then all the way down into the tactical of those different areas we were talking about. Hey, what's your why, the finances? How do you leave your job the right way? We had to rent our house. How do you navigate that? So that just sort of coaching, consulting, and then booking. Some people may not want to take a crazy sabbatical, but for those family reasons I talked about earlier, they want to take a really memorable trip with their kids that they'll never forget for the rest of their life. But Nick, I don't have time to plan a safari. I don't even know where to start, so right. I can help there too. And so that's something we're kind of getting off the ground right now through our business Away Together. But for anyone doing this yourself, I mean, if you've got a side business, or especially if you could stand up some kind of passive income, I highly recommend it. In our case, we were very intentional about not really wanting to work or have like fixed hours or be tied down to anything while we were doing this. Now, some of what we're doing is fun. We've had to learn. Allie's gotten really good at editing YouTube videos. That's been
really good. A stretch.
She's good. She's good.
Yeah.
But
It's a good time.
absolutely.
Yeah. Well, I mean, you kind of spoke to it right there. What, at the end of the day for you, and maybe this goes into the way together piece, but what do you want this experience, your experience, to be for other people? Like, that is was that part of your why? It's like, hey, this is something we're passionate about and we want to show. Do we want to show people the world? Do we want to show people a married couple committed to each other, accomplishing great things together? What is the vision for your experience to be impactful for other people that you are privileged to share your story with?
Mhm.
I think the cool thing about 2022 and the power of the internet is that there has never been a better time to be yourself
Mm-hmm.
and still get to, just like Allie's early experience, inspire someone else. Just by them seeing what we're doing, that would be wonderful to hear someday. Is that, hey, I watched some of your vlogs or I read some of your content, and that really made me believe I could do it too. I pray we get an experience like that. Another piece of it is just simply trying to help others navigate situations that were confusing to us. Getting to Thailand was an ordeal. Um, COVID is hard enough to follow in your home country. And then what are the restrictions in your home country? And it varies state to state. Well, multiply that by going to, I'm going to be in 2 different countries this week. What are their restrictions? What do I need in order to enter? And so with Thailand, it was a black box, and it took us a long time to figure out how to get here. So once that process was through, I was like, I have to make a video explaining how we did this. And so and it's already been cool to hear the stories from a couple of people that were like
from Denmark or like Australia, trying to do the same thing.
Wow.
And you're able to help them. And yeah, so I would say, I think it looks a lot of different ways. It's not just the inspirational part of like, of course, as someone who was the like kind of the doorstop for a really long time on this decision and this life-changing thing, like I want to be the person to say, don't let your fears or doubts or insecurities or like roadblocks keep you from something that's epic, or that, it can be life altering, changing, no matter how big or small it is, right? Like if it is just moving to a different city, like don't let the little things hang you up. Like if I can tell that to a person, then that's a win. But even down to the small things of like, if I can just help you get to Thailand right now, like that's awesome.
Yeah, man. Well, let me tackle this. Here's a logistical thing that has to be coming up in your relationship is how are you dealing with church and times of worship and not being able to be in your home church? And is it just tapping into online? Have you done found local churches? How do you do that? Because there's a large portion of people out there that are saying like, yeah, I'm committed to being in a house of worship, each week.
I'll encourage anyone out there that with some intentionality, it's not hard to find. And I'll confess, we haven't gone to a physical service every Sunday. I mean, there are times where I don't even know what day of the week it is.
I know, yeah.
But our church that we're part of back home does a great job of
online services.
They have online services.
Okay.
Podcasts.
So you can tap into that.
So, I've been able to plug into that.
I think one really cool thing that we actually just experienced, 2 days ago?
Don't say where.
Yeah. A couple of days ago. Like we reached out before we left our church, Nick did, to connect with, how can we connect with missionaries in the places that we are? How can we connect with them and that kind of thing? So, we've been able to do that, hopefully get to do that a little bit more. But yeah, again, another kind of thing that COVID came out is, I believe a lot of churches went to online services, and a lot of them have continued that. So it's possible.
Yeah, that's one area that I tried to be intentional with the global pastor at our church that kind of helps manage a lot of the church planters and global workers that are out in the field. And I was very upfront with them, like, hey, I would love to cross paths with some of these people. We didn't have any illusions that we would show up and be like helping, like, because sometimes
that's more of a nuisance.
You could be more in the way than actually helping. But I would encourage anyone with an interest in something like this to be intentional about that, because there are a lot of global workers and missionaries in the field that just want to see a face from a culture that's familiar to them, or just want encouragement. They want a night to just eat dinner and relax and talk with people. So that has been a cool part of our journey, something we hope to do more, but something I would definitely encourage others to look into.
Right on. No, that's a huge tip. I wouldn't even necessarily think of that. I can think of missionary friends who it's like, hey, if I ever get that way, I'd like to visit. But just that having contact with a caring, compassionate person for anybody in whatever field they're in is absolutely important. Well, where are you headed to next, if you can share?
Tomorrow we fly to Bangkok. And we've actually had a friend with us for the last couple of weeks. So we had a friend from home meet us. That's happened a couple of times, which is always cool. Really fun. Yeah. He flies home from Bangkok. We are probably going to stay in Thailand for at least 30 days. So a couple of more weeks. We may head over to Cambodia for a brief time, but Southeast Asia was high on our list of places to stay, but unfortunately COVID hasn't really allowed those countries to open back up. So we may head to Central South America. We may hop the pond again. That's the fun part, is like, we don't know. So once our friend leaves, we're gonna hit some coffee shops and plan it out. But that's the exciting part.
Yeah, it's definitely, like I said, for a couple of type A people, it's definitely been an exercise in trust and just being flexible and figuring it out.
Yeah. Do you think it's going to be doable at this level with kids? Because I know there's a lot of people listening saying, man, this sounds great, but I got little ones. There's school. There's, barriers, right, that we need to figure out. People that I'm just even thinking out loud, like people that you've come in contact, people that are doing this, how do they navigate some of that?
There are people who have kids that travel full time. Again, YouTube, great resource. There are lots of people who are doing that and showing how they do that. There are global remote, and now, especially since, a lot of even just physical schools went to online schools because of COVID. A lot of parents who may be choosing to keep their kids in online education for whatever reason. But there are schools for online global education that you would allow you to travel full time. For us personally, a big thing on our list when we go home is thinking about how do we maintain some of the location independence. So not necessarily that we want to travel full time, but we have jobs that we could do anywhere in the world. So if we wanted to pick up and go to, say, Costa Rica for a month and work from Costa Rica, we could do that. So when we have kids, I think it might look a little bit more like that than it is like we are keeping our kids full time on the road. And I think, as someone who doesn't have children right now, I think a lot of it's going to depend on, the personality of your kids, what your family goals are. That's a big thing for us, is writing down our family values and what we want to teach our kids. But yeah, I think it'll look a little slower, and it may look more like segmented based on what we can do. But there are resources out there. There are lots of people on YouTubes and the interwebs that full-time travel with families. So it's definitely possible. And
I think slow is the key word. Yeah. In terms of,
Allie, did you hear Nick said that?
Yeah.
I'm learning something. But yeah, I think slow would be the key, no matter the age of your kids. And course, it depends on the length of your trip. But if you were going to do it full time, I would highly recommend like do a month here, do a month there, or a few weeks, whatever like that. It's just the moving component could be exhausting, even if you're a seasoned traveler. And so for a child, I think it can be tough.
Yeah, no, that's wise. What do we miss, guys?
And I don't know.
What's some encouragement? Just speak right to the audience now and sum this up and what we've been talking about and what it means to you all to be doing this. And I know we kind of hit that at a greater scale, but if you can just kind of boil it down and give some encouragement to the listeners.
Yeah, I would say, number one, take the time to ask questions that make you uncomfortable and draw out the latent desires of what do I want? The travel component of this, we're not making a value statement. Your thing may not be travel. Your thing may not be a sabbatical. Your thing may be, hey, I want to pursue a new career. Your thing could be, hey, I really feel like I'm called to be a stay-at-home mom for a season. Whatever it is, take the time to have that uncomfortable conversation with yourself and with your spouse or whoever, and figure out your why. That was part number one of our planning, but I would say that is the cornerstone to like just living a life of intention in general. And don't stifle yourself with the how and the, oh, it couldn't work. Like, put it out there and then work like crazy to make it happen. Make a plan, have self-discipline, and ask yourself, how could this work? How can this happen? Don't try and figure out the reasons why it wouldn't.
Yeah, I would just say all those things. And then big ideas take time and they take effort. So, I think you have to have your head on right, or you have to have kind of, and that goes back to why, because you would stray, you could stray, but it deserves the time and the effort if the idea really means that much to you. And it's, when you make goals, I say like throw them out as big as you can make them, so.
And then I would say, surround yourself with people, with resources that are going to help you become who you want to be.
Yeah. Perfect. Well, how does everybody connect with you? Well, we're going to link things up in the show notes, but go ahead and tell everybody how they can follow along in your journey, find out more about A Way Together. How can people connect with you guys?
You bet. Well, like I said, we're A Way Together. And so the number one way to follow along our journey is on YouTube. Our YouTube channel is A Way Together with Nik and Allie.
Nik.
Yeah.
There you go.
And then our site is awaytogether.com. The free resource I mentioned, our guide to going away. It's a simple ebook to help you lay the groundwork for planning your own sabbatical or mini retirement. You can get that at awaytogether.com/interrupted.
Love it. Absolutely. So, man, well, with that, I have to say, guys, I feel very privileged to have you all carve out some time for this conversation. It's been really impactful for me personally to hear. It's encouraging to see a married couple still so captivated by each other and helping each other in really positive ways. And that honestly, if that's the thing that people take away from this conversation, I would be more than thrilled, which is I'm so thankful, Allie, that you were able to join us, because it's a shared story that needs to be told. And so hopefully some people picked up some tips along the way as well, and go out and have an adventure. But I can't thank you all enough for taking the time to do this morning.
Yeah, it's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you for having me, and then both of us.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, 100%. Well, we'll be in touch, and I'll be anxious. Maybe on the back side of this, we might have to get another conversation, and the lessons learned, and do a little follow up, because
That'd be really
I
cool.
mean, you're in the throes of it, man. So like we are gonna need to know. It's like kind of stopping halfway through the book for the audience. I think that's kind of how I feel, because I'm wondering a lot right now. So maybe we'll have to tee that up later. So anyway, well, thank you all for joining us, man. It's a real honor. So you all be safe, and find some amazing places to tell us all about.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having us.